Welcome, all brothers and sisters in Christ, to Soulful Scriptures Every Day. We are just so thrilled to have you joining us for another deep dive today.
Yes, absolutely. Welcome, everyone. We have a really fascinating intersection of topics to explore with you all.
We really do, because, if you've ever stepped into one of those massive, centuries-old cathedrals, your eyes are just immediately drawn upward, right, to the stained glass windows.
Oh, yeah. Involuntarily, almost.
Right. And there is a very specific, highly engineered reason for that. I mean, for centuries, long before we had mass literacy or, the printing press, those towering images of light and glass were basically the primary way to communicate authority.
They really were the mass media of their day.
Exactly. They were designed to project a divine mandate and ultimate truth right to the public. You'd walk into the nave, you look at the light pouring through those figures, and you understood exactly who was in charge and who had the backing of the heavens. It was clear. It was static.
Unquestionable, really.
Completely unquestionable. But okay, I want you to imagine taking that centuries-old stained glass window, shattering it into a million pieces, digitizing the shards, and just cramming them onto a glowing smartphone screen that refreshes every, 3 seconds.
Which is quite the visual, honestly.
Right. But suddenly that imagery of faith and power, it isn't static anymore. It is infinitely malleable. It's being generated by algorithms, it's shared at the speed of light, and it's being weaponized in the daily trenches of modern political warfare.
And that's exactly what we're looking at today. This cultural landscape where the lines between sacred iconography, digital media, and raw partisan combat are just, they're completely melting down.
Completely. So the central question driving our deep dive today is, how exactly is ancient theology adapting to algorithmically generated reality?
Which requires us to act, essentially, as forensic analysts of modern media.
Yeah, we have to put on our detective hats.
Exactly. And to answer that question, we are going to rely on a truly phenomenal piece of reporting. It's an article by John Brown, published in the Christian Post.
A great piece.
It really is. We are going to meticulously deconstruct how religious symbolism is currently being deployed, how the rhetorical armor is forged when those symbols trigger controversy, and frankly, how faith leaders navigate the blast radius.
The blast radius, yeah.
Our focal point for this analysis will be the recent public statements and private maneuvering of evangelist Franklin Graham as he navigates the highly controversial social media activity of President Donald Trump.
Okay, let's unpack this by starting with what has to be one of the most fascinating rhetorical pivots in recent political history.
Oh, this first part is wild.
It really is. I like to call it the doctor defense, because to understand any of Franklin Graham's subsequent statements, we really have to start at the literal surface level, right? The visual imagery that acted as the immediate catalyst.
The spark that lit the fire.
Yeah. And it all begins with a deleted social media post on Truth Social.
Right. The initial incident, as John Brown details in the reporting, it centers entirely around an AI-generated image posted by President Trump.
Yeah.
And, in our current media ecosystem, the visual semiotics of this image are just everything.
They really are. It didn't just cause a mild stir.
No, it triggered an immediate structural pushback.
Let's talk about those visual semiotics, because the article details exactly what this image depicted. It showed Trump as a robed figure standing with light literally emanating from his hands.
Light shooting from his hands.
Yes. Now, you don't need a PhD in art history to recognize the visual vocabulary being used here.
Not at all.
To the vast majority of people who saw this image scrolling across their feeds, it immediately registered as a Christ-like depiction. It is tapping directly into classic, centuries-old messianic iconography. You have the flowing first-century garments, the posture of benediction, and that supernatural light source originating from the subject's own body.
It is the digital equivalent of that stained glass window you mentioned.
Exactly.
And the reaction is what makes this specific incident so telling. Because this wasn't a case of, the political left crying foul over a conservative meme.
No, not this time.
The pushback was swift, and critically, it came from inside the House. The source specifically notes that the alarm bells were rung by Trump's own supporters.
Wow.
Yeah, culminating in prominent pushback from Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson.
I want to pause on Mike Johnson for a second, because I think that is the most crucial detail of this early timeline. Why does Mike Johnson, a steadfast political ally, feel compelled to push back publicly against this? What is the invisible line that this AI image crossed?
Well, it reveals the tension between political allegiance and theological orthodoxy.
Say more about that.
So for someone like Mike Johnson, who is deeply rooted in conservative evangelicalism, there's a fundamental theological guardrail regarding idolatry, right, and the deification of political leaders.
The First Commandment stuff.
Exactly. You can support a leader's policies. You can even believe they are providentially placed in power. But the moment the visual language elevates a mortal politician to the literal position of the savior glowing hands in all low, it triggers a deeply ingrained theological gag reflex.
A gag reflex, yeah, that's a good way to put it.
The image was just too explicitly divine. And the pressure from these specific vital allies was so significant that the post was actually deleted on a Monday.
Which is huge. But here is where the mechanics of digital crisis communication kick in. Because in today's hyper-scrutinized environment, you can't just delete a post and pretend it never existed, right?
No, the internet is forever.
Exactly. You have to fill that vacuum with a narrative. And the narrative Trump offered is just, it's staggering.
It really is.
He completely dismissed the allegations that he was attempting to liken himself to Jesus Christ. His defense, according to the article, was that he thought the AI-generated image depicted him simply as a doctor who was healing people.
A doctor.
Yes, a doctor in first-century robes with glowing hands.
It is a masterstroke of plausible deniability, honestly. And it's reliant entirely on the nature of artificial intelligence. Well, if this were an oil painting, commissioned by the campaign, that defense would be laughable. The artist made choices. But because it's AI, there's a built-in buffer of algorithmic randomness.
Oh, right. The computer did it.
Exactly. It allows the politician to shift the interpretation from the divine to the secular, from the miraculous to the medical. He's essentially gaslighting the visual cortex of the observer, saying, you didn't see a Messiah. You saw a physician making a very intense house call.
A very intense house call. That's so true. It's like a digital Rorschach test, but one where the creator gets to retroactively tell you what the ink blot means.
Yes, precisely.
And this is where Franklin Graham steps into the fray. Just a few days later, on a Thursday, Graham, who is the CEO of Samaritan's Purse and a massive figure in the evangelical world, he issues a formal statement to provide cover for this doctor defense.
And Graham's statement is a highly sophisticated piece of crisis communication.
It really is.
He doesn't just blindly defend the image right out of the gate.
Right.
He starts by establishing a baseline of shared moral reality. He explicitly states that it would be inappropriate for Trump to knowingly depict himself as Jesus Christ.
Right. So he validates Mike Johnson. He validates all those evangelical critics. He says, you are right to be upset if this was intentional.
Exactly. He offers a path to grace. He conditionally validates the outrage, which immediately lowers the temperature in the room. But then
he pivots.
He fully pivots to accept Trump's premise that it was all a giant algorithmic misunderstanding. And to support this, Graham conducts what we might call a secular inventory of the image.
This is the part that genuinely blew my mind when I was reading the piece, because when you look closely at John Brown's reporting, Graham defends the image by pointing out the background elements.
The background elements.
He literally lists them out. He notes the image contained an American flag, soldiers, a nurse, fighter planes, eagles, and the Statue of Liberty.
Quite the collage.
Right. He uses this very specific list to ground the image entirely in the earthly patriotic realm, concluding that the outrage is, quote, a lot to do about nothing.
What's fascinating here is how Graham uses the cluttered nature of AI-generated art to his advantage. AI often spits out these hallucinogenic collages, right? Just throwing everything into the background.
Totally. Like extra fingers and weird flag.
Exactly. So Graham points to the fighter planes and the eagle as if to say, how could you possibly confuse this with the biblical scene? Did they have F-16s in ancient Galilee?
Right. But I have to push back on Graham's logic here just purely from an analytical standpoint. It feels like a massive misdirection.
Oh, it is.
If you have a figure in the foreground wearing a first-century tunic with literal glowing light shooting out of his hands, does the presence of a bald eagle in the background really cancel out the messianic foreground?
Visually, no.
Graham specifically argues that there were no halos, no crosses, no angels. But you don't need a literal cross to evoke the divine if the composition itself mimics religious iconography. Why does he think listing secular Americana neutralizes those glowing hands?
Well, it doesn't neutralize it visually, as you said.
Yeah.
But it neutralizes it rhetorically. It gives the defender a script to read from. And Graham takes it a step further. He doesn't just defend the image. He actively weaponizes the controversy.
Weaponizes it how?
The text details how Graham attributes the backlash to, quote, ill-intended speculation.
Wow.
Yeah, he pivots the blame away from the person who hit post and onto the observers. He claims that Trump's enemies are always foaming at the mouth at any possible opportunity to make him look bad.
That is incredible rhetorical jujitsu.
It really is.
He takes an unforced error posting an AI image that offends your own evangelical allies and flips it into a narrative of persecution. Suddenly, the controversy isn't about the politician's hubris or accidental idolatry, it's about the malice of the politician's enemies.
Which exposes the profound utility of AI in modern political warfare.
Say more about that.
Well, this technology allows political figures to generate and distribute highly provocative, boundary-pushing imagery for very low cost. They can test the waters, gauge the audience's reaction, and see exactly how much deification the base will tolerate on a given Tuesday.
Right, sending up a trial balloon.
Exactly. And if the blowback is too severe, if a Mike Johnson steps in and says, no, they have an immediate escape hatch, the AI is the ultimate fall guy.
The computer made it weird.
The computer made it weird. I thought it was a doctor, and my enemies are twisting it. It provides plausible deniability on just an unprecedented scale.
So algorithmically generated plausible deniability, that's a chilling concept, frankly. But as John Brown's article immediately reveals, that deniability wasn't needed for very long at all.
No, it wasn't.
Because if the first half of the week was spent vehemently denying any spiritual intent, the second half of the week swung the pendulum entirely in the opposite direction.
Yes. The sequence of events is incredibly rapid.
Just days.
The doctor image is deleted on Monday amid all this internal panic. But plausible deniability only lasts until the algorithm pushes out something undeniable. And that is exactly what happened just 48 hours later.
On Wednesday.
By Wednesday, a new meme was posted by Trump. And the visual and textual landscape of this meme abandons any pretense of secular misinterpretation.
The article describes this second meme as depicting Jesus, and explicitly Jesus this time, no confusing him for a doctor embracing Trump at a podium in front of an American flag.
A very clear image.
Very clear. But the image is only half the story. The rhetoric in the caption of this meme is a severe, almost whiplash-inducing escalation from Monday.
It's intense.
The text accompanying the meme suggested that God might be playing his trump card in order to elevate the former president to expose, and I am quoting the source's description here, these satanic, demonic, child-sacrificing monsters, which the article notes is presumably referring to Democrats.
We have to stop and recognize the sheer velocity of that rhetorical shift.
It's dizzying.
In the span of 2 days, we have moved from a delicate debate over whether a glowing hand implies divinity to explicitly labeling political opponents with the most extreme spiritually loaded terms possible.
Yeah, demonic.
Words like satanic and demonic are not just political slurs. They are ontological classifications.
Right, they define the very nature of a person's being.
Exactly. They strip the opponent of their humanity and frame the political contest as a literal apocalyptic spiritual war.
And what was the politician's own commentary on this post? Because he didn't just share it blindly. He added his own caption stating that while the, quote, radical left lunatics might not like this, but I think it is quite nice, with 3 exclamation points.
3 exclamation points, which forces Franklin Graham right back into the spotlight.
Yeah.
Because he had just spent his political capital defending the first image as a harmless secular mistake.
A lot of capital.
Now he's confronted with a second image that explicitly pairs divine endorsement with aggressive, apocalyptic political attacks.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. How does Graham react to this? I mean, does he say, whoa, okay, calling our political opponents child-sacrificing monsters crosses a line?
You would think so, given his stance on the first image.
Right. But no. With this second image, Graham expresses full, unreserved approval. According to the text, Graham stated he liked the depiction of Jesus whispering in his ear, or at least his hand on his shoulder guiding him.
Guiding him, yeah.
He then adds this universal pastoral takeaway saying, we all need to be listening to Jesus.
It is a breathtaking display of cognitive compartmentalization.
That's putting it mildly. I mean, I am genuinely struggling to reconcile the mechanics of this.
It's difficult.
How does a seasoned religious leader look at a social media post that explicitly calls half the country demonic, child-sacrificing monsters and summarize the primary takeaway as a gentle Sunday school reminder that we all need to be listening to Jesus?
It's a huge disconnect.
It feels like he is willfully ignoring the bomb going off in the room to, complement the wallpaper.
He is executing a very deliberate strategy of separation.
Okay, break that down for me.
Graham is bifurcating the visual from the textual. When you analyze his response in John Brown's piece, he chooses to focus entirely and exclusively on the spiritual comfort of the image. A leader being guided by the divine.
The hug.
The hug. He completely surgically removes the severe political allegations in the memes text from his analysis. He uses the image of Jesus hugging the politician as an opportunity, in his own words, to encourage everyone to seek Christ.
So he extracts a pure orthodox theological lesson out of a highly toxic digital weapon.
Yes. He completely sanitizes it.
Wow.
And he uses a very specific mechanical excuse to justify this sanitization. This is crucial for understanding modern digital rhetoric, especially in politics.
What's the excuse?
Graham heavily emphasizes the origin of the post. He says, remember, President Trump didn't draw this, he didn't create it, he reposted it on his social media because he thought it was nice. I would have to agree.
Oh, the repost defense.
The repost defense.
Let's dig into that because it functions almost like money laundering for political rhetoric.
That's exactly what it is.
Right. The extreme idea is generated by some anonymous account in the dark corners of the internet. Then the mainstream political figure hits share or truth. The original toxicity is sort of scrubbed clean by the act of curation, and the audience receives it as a sanitized endorsement.
Yes.
Graham is basically saying he didn't forge the sword, he just swung it, so you can't blame him for the cut.
It is an incredibly effective architectural feature of social media platforms, and Graham is leveraging it perfectly here. The act of reposting alters the perceived accountability.
It creates distance.
Exactly. In Graham's framework, hitting the share button creates distance. It allows the supporter to agree with the general sentiment, the niceness of divine guidance, without having to take moral ownership of the specific, extreme accusations of child-sacrificing monsters that are permanently attached to the image.
It allows you to have your cake and eat it, too. You get the emotional surge of the extreme base, firing them up with apocalyptic rhetoric without alienating the moderate defender who can just shrug and say, well, he just thought the picture of Jesus was nice. He didn't write the caption.
Exactly. It diffuses responsibility while maximizing the political impact. But, to fully understand the scope of this intersection between faith and politics, we cannot just look at domestic social media squabbles.
Right. It goes way beyond memes.
It does. The framework we are describing, using divine imagery to shield political action and using historical archetypes to justify aggression, it doesn't stop at the water's edge. John Brown's reporting expands the lens significantly, showing how these exact same alliances impact international relations and global religious figures.
This was such a shift in the article. We move from truth social memes directly to the Vatican.
The Vatican, yes.
The article introduces a massive geopolitical element, the ongoing public feud between President Trump and Pope Leo XIV.
And this feud isn't over a meme.
No.
It is over a very tangible, real-world conflict. The war in Iran. While the specific military maneuvers of the Iran war aren't the focus of the source material, the theological defense of that conflict is central, because once again, Franklin Graham steps in to mediate the narrative.
And he does it by deploying a very specific historical and biblical precedent.
He does.
The text notes that the previous month, Graham defended Trump in this feud with the Pope by citing the Old Testament example of King David. He uses King David to justify the president's actions regarding Iran.
And we really need to analyze why the King David analogy is so potent here, because it is not chosen at random.
No, definitely not.
It is a foundational concept in certain branches of political theology. By invoking King David, you are invoking a very specific archetype.
Yeah.
The divinely anointed warrior king.
I want to make sure we don't gloss over this, because for you listening, for anyone analyzing political rhetoric, understanding the Davidic archetype is like finding the Rosetta Stone for evangelical political defense.
It really is the key.
David is universally revered as a man after God's own heart, right? The greatest king of Israel. But he is also a deeply, deeply flawed vessel. He was a warlord, his hands were covered in blood from constant warfare, and his personal moral failings were catastrophic. I mean, Bathsheba, Uriah.
Yes, profound moral failings, which is exactly why he's the perfect rhetorical shield.
How so?
When Graham compares a modern politician to King David, he is implicitly acknowledging all of those flaws.
He's leaning into them.
He's saying, yes, the rhetoric is aggressive. Yes, the geopolitical actions like the war in Iran are bloody and controversial.
Yeah.
Yes, the man himself is imperfect. But the genius of the analogy is that it instantly elevates those imperfections. It wraps them in a cloak of divine mandate.
Wow. So it essentially argues that God prefers a ruthless fighter over a polite moralist when the stakes are high.
Precisely. The Davidic framing allows supporters to look at actions that might otherwise violate their own ethical standards and
Mhm.
justify them as necessary components of a larger, divinely sanctioned plan for protection and triumph.
It immunizes the politician from traditional moral critique.
It completely immunizes them, because if you argue that the leader is acting in the spirit of a divinely appointed warrior king, then criticizing their wars isn't just political dissent. It borders on questioning the divine plan itself.
It's a theological trump card, no pun intended.
Right.
But what makes this specific instance so wild is who Graham is using this argument against. We have an American evangelical leader stepping up to defend an American president against the head of the global Catholic Church.
It's unprecedented in many ways.
It's a fascinating theological diplomatic tightrope.
Wow.
Why is Graham, who is very clear about his Protestant evangelical identity, stepping in to narrate the relationship between the president and the Pope?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture within John Brown's text, it reveals how Graham perceives Trump's role on a global, almost cosmic scale.
Okay, tell me more.
Graham explicitly states in the article, "He is the most pro-Christian, pro-life president in my lifetime," and he doesn't shy away from it. Graham views the president not just as an American political executive, but as a global protector of religious freedom.
The text actually mentions he specifically claims Trump protects religious liberty for millions of evangelicals and Catholics in the U.S. and around the world.
Exactly. So by framing the politician as the ultimate shield for all Christians globally, including Catholics, Graham positions himself to essentially lecture the Pope.
Wow.
He is building a unified religious coalition under a political umbrella. He's saying to the Vatican, you may disagree with his methods in Iran, you may dislike his rhetoric, but you rely on his protection.
And the friction there is palpable. The article notes that Pope Leo XIV reportedly has no plans to visit his native United States under the current administration.
Which is a massive diplomatic snub.
Huge. The head of the Catholic Church refusing to visit his home country because of the political climate.
It is a profound geopolitical statement by the Pope. Yet, despite this glaring public rift, Graham expresses hope in his Thursday statement for a future meeting.
But look at the terms of the meeting Graham hopes for.
Right.
He says he hopes the Pope and the President can meet so that the Pope has the opportunity to, in Graham's words, thank the President for his efforts to protect religious liberty.
So Graham is essentially demanding gratitude from the Vatican on behalf of the Oval Office.
That's exactly what he's doing.
He is insisting that the Pope must acknowledge the King David archetype. It is a breathtaking use of ancient narratives to shape modern high-stakes geopolitics.
It really is, but all of the memes, the public defenses, the geopolitical posturing with the Pope, it's all external. It's the public face.
Yes, the performative aspect.
What I found most compelling about John Brown's article is that it doesn't stop there. It pulls back the curtain.
Yes. The final segment of our deep dive examines the intimate, behind-the-scenes interactions between the politician and his spiritual advisors. We really have to look at whether the private messaging matches this very aggressive public defense.
And the source article provides 3 specific recent events that give us a window into this private dynamic. And the contrast is quite revealing. Honestly, it almost gave me whiplash.
It's quite a shift. Let's look at the first event.
Right. The first event is a private letter. The text says Franklin Graham sent a private letter to Trump last October, which Trump actually ended up posting publicly on Palm Sunday.
And the contents of this letter are intensely personal and rooted in traditional theology.
Totally different tone.
Graham urged the president to seriously consider his eternal state. He urged him to accept Jesus Christ as his Savior, and he explicitly told him to cease trusting in his own works if he hopes to go to heaven.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that phrase. Cease trusting in his own works, because that is the absolute bedrock of Orthodox evangelical theology.
It is.
It's the concept of salvation through grace alone, not through human effort, wealth, or political achievements. Ephesians 2:8-9, right?
Correct. In this private letter, Graham is abandoning the political defense and stepping fully into the role of a traditional pastor. He is speaking to a parishioner, emphasizing spiritual humility and the utter inadequacy of worldly success in the face of eternity.
It is a powerful, humbling message to direct at a man whose entire public persona and brand is built on his works, his deals, his massive successes.
It really is.
So in private, you have a call for humility. But then we look at the second event the article details, which happened at a White House Easter luncheon during Holy Week.
This luncheon provides the counterweight to the private letter, and it prompted significant public outrage.
What happened?
The text notes that White House Faith Office leader and televangelist Paula White-Cain spoke at this event, and her rhetoric could not have been further from the orthodox humility of Graham's private letter.
The article states she compared Trump's political trajectory to the literal suffering and resurrection of Jesus.
Yes.
She drew a direct parallel between a politician navigating political scandals and campaigns and the foundational miracle of the Christian faith.
This raises an important question about the theological mechanics at play here. Paula White-Cain operates largely within the prosperity gospel or word of faith tradition, which has a very different mechanical understanding of language and power than Graham's traditional evangelicalism.
Right, naming and claiming.
Exactly. But even within that context, comparing a living politician's career to the resurrection is highly unorthodox. It borders on transgressive.
So what does this all mean for the observer? I mean, we have a private letter urging spiritual humility sitting right next to a highly public luncheon that essentially deifies the politician's career.
Side by side.
How do these leaders balance private spiritual counseling with such overt public political deification? It seems impossible to hold both realities at once without the cognitive dissonance tearing the whole structure apart.
It highlights a profound duality in the role of modern spiritual advisors to political power.
Privately, they must maintain traditional pastoral duties, calling for humility, recognizing the flaws of the individual, treating them as a mortal soul in need of salvation.
The pastor hat.
The pastor hat. But publicly, their utility to the political campaign relies on their ability to elevate the figure to a quasi-messianic status. They provide the ultimate unassailable spiritual endorsement to a voting base that responds to apocalyptic urgency.
So it's a dual-track system.
Yes.
Private orthodoxy, public deification.
Exactly.
And that tension brings us to the third event mentioned in the article, which perfectly encapsulates the legal and semantic gymnastics required to maintain this system.
CPAC.
Yes, it happened during Graham's address at the Conservative Political Action Conference, or CPAC, in Grapevine, Texas.
According to the source, Graham told the CPAC audience in a very straightforward manner that it's important that we do everything that we can to get the former president reelected.
Which is an overt, unambiguous political endorsement. Do everything we can to get him reelected. But then, the text notes, he immediately walked it back. He claimed he misspoke. He clarified that he was referring to re-electing the policies, not the person himself.
This distinction is critical to understand because it reveals the structural and legal constraints these leaders operate under.
Right. It's not just semantics for fun.
No, we have to look at the mechanics of the tax code here.
Oh, interesting.
Why would an evangelical leader who has spent weeks defending the president's memes, defending his geopolitical actions against the Pope, and writing him private pastoral letters suddenly feel the need to parse words at a conservative conference?
Right. If he is the most pro-Christian president in my lifetime, as Graham said earlier, why the sudden semantic retreat at CPAC?
It comes down to the Johnson Amendment and the legal architecture governing religious nonprofits.
Okay, lay that out for us.
501c3 organizations are strictly prohibited from participating in or intervening in any political campaign on behalf of a candidate for public office.
Oh, what?
If Graham officially endorses the person while acting in his capacity as a religious leader, he risks the tax-exempt status of his massive organizations.
So the policy versus person distinction is literally a legal safety net.
It's a legal safety net, but it's also an optical one.
An optical one.
Yeah. By claiming to only endorse policies, a religious leader can maintain a veneer of spiritual objectivity. They can claim they are merely fighting for moral outcomes, pro-life legislation, religious liberty protections, without having to take absolute moral ownership of every personal action, every extreme meme, or every controversial statement made by the candidate themselves.
It is the ultimate hate the sin, love the tax cuts strategy.
That's one way to put it, yeah.
Or, returning to our earlier discussion, ignore the extreme text of the meme, love the image of Jesus guiding the leader. It's a massive compartmentalization that allows these leaders to engage deeply in bare-knuckle partisan politics while maintaining the semantic and legal boundaries of a nonprofit ministry.
And returning to John Brown's article, we see that the defense mechanism deployed by figures like Graham is not a single unified theory.
No, it's all over the place.
It is a highly adaptable, multi-layered strategy. It shifts from claiming a meme is entirely secular to avoid idolatry charges, to embracing a meme as divinely inspired when it suits the base, to using ancient kings to justify modern wars, to separating personal salvation from policy endorsements when the tax man is watching.
It's theological parkour.
Theological parkour. I love that.
You are watching them bounce off the walls of controversy, tax law, and digital media, and it is just utterly fascinating to map out.
And for you, listening to this deep dive, the vital takeaway isn't about memorizing the timeline of who tweeted what on which day.
No, definitely not.
Whether you are approaching this from a historical perspective, studying political science, or analyzing modern communications, the core lesson is recognizing the mechanics of this messaging. Understanding how ancient religious frameworks are continuously, seamlessly mapped onto modern digital media is absolutely crucial for navigating today's information landscape.
Yeah.
It is never just a meme. It is always part of a larger, highly engineered narrative strategy.
Exactly. When you see that digital stained glass window pop up on your smartphone feed, you need to understand the algorithm that put it there, the historical archetype being invoked, and the rhetorical armor being forged to defend it. It's not just pixels, it's power.
It is absolute power.
Which brings us to our final thought, something for you to chew on long after you finish listening today.
Let's hear it.
We've spent a lot of time talking about AI and plausible deniability. But what happens to the value of these symbols over time? In an era where artificial intelligence makes it utterly effortless to generate divine endorsements, where anyone can create an image of glowing hands or a divine embrace with a few simple keystrokes, how does that permanently alter the landscape of political campaigning?
It fundamentally becomes a question of inflation, really.
Yes. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, what is an algorithmically generated image of divine intervention worth to a voting bloc?
That's a great question.
If every candidate can digitally manufacture the backing of the heavens in high definition, will these images lose their power as they become ubiquitous? Or will the ease of creation only escalate the rhetoric, forcing campaigns to reach for even more extreme apocalyptic visuals just to cut through the noise?
That is the precipice we are currently standing on. We are watching the inflation of divine currency in real time.
It is indeed. Keep questioning what you read, keep analyzing the semiotics of what you see in your feed, and never stop looking for the deeper mechanical narrative behind the image. Thank you for joining us today on Soulful Scriptures Everyday Brothers and Sisters. Take care.